Hello there, right here, and in today's video we will be looking at the newest changes in 1.18 as a new experimental snapshot is out, and there's a lot of weird stuff to take a look at like this thing behind me. So let's get started. There are some big changes to do with terrain as well as mob spawning, as it is now over 27 times slower. We'll be looking at all this in depth, so make sure you hit that like button as well as subscribe so that you stay up to date on the latest discoveries. They made fixes to temperature clashing. They tweaked the way that different temperature biomes generate near each other to produce less clashing, such as like having a snowy biome in the middle of a desert. But they said it's still in the game, and here is an example of it. If we look up here in the air, we are currently in a savanna biome. But if we go downwards, all the way down onto the ground, it actually turns into a jungle biome. And that's why there is jungle trees down here that are green. But the tops of the jungle trees are actually a kind of dead color, which looks really weird from a distance. And this whole little jungle biome is in the middle of a savanna. And we've seen some areas where there was like snow on top of jungle trees in a jungle. They also change it so that there is more noisiness in the biome diversity. So it's going to be more like the first snapshot where we've seen more of these microbiomes. Here's a really small mesa just in the middle of nowhere, but there's even some way smaller biomes. Here we have a just very small bamboo jungle right here. And there's a little bit more of it right here. But which is really funny is over here, there's actually inside of this massive jungle, a really small piece of savanna right here. But if microbiomes do occur, they're more likely to be related to the nearby biome temperatures. Like savannas and jungles are both considered hot, even though jungles are considered humid or savannas are considered dry. And you can see an example of a bug in the game where the game doesn't put leaves on some sides of trees that are crossing over into the next chunk border. Some of the terrain transition can just be amazing. Look at this jungle side, how it transitions down to this ocean and all these crazy little caverns and caves it creates underneath of it. With the lush caves being underneath of this, it's almost like a pirate bay. And we even found some jungle trees with snow on top of them, which definitely look out of place. They also added in a new biome, which is this one here. It is called Stony Peaks. And it's supposed to be a variant of the lofty or the snow-capped peaks. But instead of having like the snow and the ice, it instead has the stone and gravel across it. And these can be found at the very high points of hot as well as dry biomes, such as like a jungle. This way you don't see like snow peaks at the very top of like a desert or the very top of like a jungle. They look amazing and they really fit in well. Just look how this stony peak slowly converts from the hot biome over into the cold biome where it turns into snow-capped peaks. Very cool transition. They also fixed it so that badlands are also known as mesas once again produce the red sand so you can collect it again. And they will sometimes generate near plateaus. So now the red sand can even generate quite high up in the air compared to where it used to. They changed it so that meadows as well as all the different types of peaks will no longer generate in low level flat elevation areas. Notice how this meadow is up here on top of this hill here, and as soon as it kind of starts tapering off and getting lower, it will then convert over into other biomes and it won't continue down into the low areas. They also added in more roundedness for these shattered types of biomes. This here you can see looks less squarish and more natural, as before they were so square that it almost looked like there was a chunk air in some areas. This rune portal here chose a really cool place to generate. Snowy slopes and snow-capped peaks have now had the dirt removed underneath of the snow. That way the dirt doesn't show up along the edge in some cases, which kind of would ruin the look of it. Villages sure look amazing when they generate on these mountainsides. They're just so spread out and elevated. They fixed it so now goats will spawn in these new mountain type of biomes. And you can also find the white rabbits here. They also made it so structures can generate on top of the new mountain biomes. This includes the pillager outposts can spawn on top of all of them. Here we see one that's on top of the snowy slopes. And villages can generate on top of meadow biomes, but the village type will be the same as like the plains. They also changed beaches so that beaches won't keep climbing up the side of mountains like we've seen in the last one where they could be as like high as 100 wide level. Now they'll stay down nice and low. You can see one right here. We also have this really cool shipwreck that's inland. They also said that they supposedly reduced the amount of stone beaches, but I don't know about that. This whole thing you see here is actually a massive stone beach. Seems pretty excessive. You're still able to find lush caves exposed to the surface. Here we have quite a few along this side, and it also picks up over here, and you can see the clay that comes with it. These mossy stone outcroppings don't seem to really match with the terrain. The views are just amazing, especially when you have two mountains with a river in between them. They also made a change to do with aquifers so that they're less likely to run into the water bodies of like the ocean or nearby rivers. That way there's not a difference in water elevation. Here's some more funny aquifers. We got one way up here in the air. We got another one just a little bit lower than that one that is kind of connected and kind of sits in the middle of the air. But then underneath of that, we also got another one. And the whole thing looks kind of strange with these different waters just kind of sitting there. But you can still find some bizarre aquifers. Here we have an aquifer right up here in the air. And then right underneath of it, we actually have another aquifer directly underneath of it with a little gap in between. And just over here from that one, there is such a tiny aquifer that you think it goes into the mountain, but it actually just dead ends. Here's a ravine that got affected by the nearby water table, and the bottom part of it is flooded. It was also added so that any inland low elevation area is less likely to have flooded caves. So choosing these areas to go caving is much better rather than caving under the ocean or near it. They also changed it so aquifers will go much deeper. Here's one on the top of a mountain, and if we just go down into it, it actually goes quite deep if you follow it all the way down, and aquifers are more likely to connect in with other caves way down under the ground. And you can sometimes come across air pockets when making these transitions. They also came in with more variety for the aquifers so that there's less likely to have one massive one, and instead it'll be kind of sprawled out over a larger area. With the snowy tundra being more rolly, it can be harder to find igloos. We found this igloo over here, which is kind of funny as he's sitting on the side of this hill and he built his little basement going right towards these aquifers. Now swamp biomes are less likely to overlap with dry biomes or cold biomes, and you should also see less hanging water in the swamp biomes. They also fixed it so that we no longer will see grass blocks underneath of the water like we were seeing in the previous experimental version. They changed it so that desert temples will now spawn at the surface of the desert rather than at a fixed Y level, which would oftentimes put them underneath of these big desert mountains. But this still doesn't prevent them from spawning in very weird locations. Like this desert temple is pretty much sticking over top of a bunch of emptiness, and the actual bottom of the temple is actually just right here, so you could just mine in from the side. But there's also a whole bunch of more sandstone underneath of it, just trying to support it. They reduced the problem of having grass randomly generate in the middle of a desert. But it still seems like we get these weird occurrences where the desert kind of patches itself over the rest of the terrain, which looks almost too weird to have in the game. But there was a problem that these pillars coming from the eroded badlands were being placed floating over top of water sources. But villagers have no problem putting their crop plantations in the middle of the water. I even found the famous rock structure called Delicate Arch here in this mesa. While searching the world, I found this insane crater looking mountain. It's actually a mountain all the way around the entire thing, and it makes this massive crater in the center, and at the very top is the new stony peaks, and they actually encase this entire thing, making this massive fortress wall around the center. They also made a change so that rivers won't go into dry biomes. So the gorges of these massive desert mountains are completely dry, which make this amazing looking big huge gorge going through this entire thing. Think of climbing down one side and climbing up the other side in survival. And river biomes only generate at sea level, so even if a gorge between two mountains would seem like an ideal place to have a river, if it's above sea level, it's not going to put in any water. And this can cause some dry looking gorges in between mountains. I even found these icebergs that have flowers growing out the top of them. If you see my last experimental snapshot, I discovered that vegetation can now grow on top of snow blocks in 1.18. But by far the biggest change that they did in the snapshot is a change that has to do with mob spawning. So now mob spawning is no longer sped up at very low terrains, and it's no longer slowed down by very high terrains such as mountains. So in 1.18, all spawns are going to be like 1.17 but at Y level 64. So it's just going to be like at sea level, so not super fast and not super slow. But this has huge impact on the world. So currently in 1.17, I just got a very small platform here, 16 by 16, and you can see how fast mobs spawn on it, and I'm just having a command that kills them, and then we're counting them on the right hand side with the scoreboard. You can see how crazy fast they spawn in. Now let's compare this to a platform that is at the very top of the world. So here we have a platform that's the max height for 1.17 and is the exact same size. So you'd expect mobs to spawn at the same speed, but due to the way the game puts in mobs, it's much slower at putting them in at higher heights. So you can see this platform is not hardly producing any mobs. You just barely get one to spawn in every few seconds. And this is why, if you can, try to build your farms as low as possible, because they are just so much faster than building them higher up. And if you're wondering the exact number difference, the very bottom platform produced around 26,700 mobs in 1 hour, where this top platform only produced around 252 mobs in 1 hour. That is 100 times difference between the top platform and the bottom platform. So how does this compare to 1.18? Now we are in 1.18 and let's compare the difference. We got one platform down low and one platform way up there in the sky. Obviously we have a lot deeper caves now and also a lot higher build limits, but because of the new changes, we can see that the mobs spawning down here are extremely slow compared to 1.17. Now if you're wondering exactly how slow, so in 1.17 we got around 27,000 mob spawns on this platform in 1 hour, but I tested it in 1.18 and we would actually get under 1,000, around 960 mob spawns on this platform. So 1.18 is going to be over 27 times slower than it is in 1.17. So you can see there is a huge difference just by the platform being down low. I also tested the platform up high and got around 820 mob spawns in 1 hour. Now these are crude tests as I do get bats spawning down here as well as slime, and I'm also just counting the groups of spawns rather than the individual mobs. But you can already see the drastic difference between 1.18 and 1.17. But if this stays in the game, it doesn't make much sense to build the farms down low. You might as well just build them in the easiest place, so probably just above some ocean so you don't have to actually remove any blocks, while it's still being relatively close for you to get to the farm to actually AFK it. Now, I really hope that they increase the spawn attempts because currently it's just so extremely slow compared to 1.17. Now, I personally think it is a good idea to kind of make mobs spawn the same amount no matter in the world, no matter at what height in the world, as long as they fix it so that they at least spawn in a little bit faster. I'd love to hear what you guys think they should do about this, as it is a really big deal for all mob farms that depend on mob spawns. Even stuff like witch farms will be reduced even though their height is always the same, just because overall mob spawning seems to be a lot slower. Now the next change that they did in this experimental snapshot has to do with make sure that there's equal amount of mobs around each player that's in the world. Because in 1.17, the mobs never cared where exactly in the world they were, but they just cared how many. So if we have 2 players in the world, let's say that's one person and this is another, and let's say they each have 1 mob spawn beside them. Problem is, if this player would continue to move, if he would move farther away from this mob would have to despawn. Then it would either choose to respawn near the player as a new mob, or it also has a chance of ending up spawning near this player, and this player is not moving. If this player continues to sit still and this player continues to move, what would happen over time is that all the mobs that this guy was spawning would eventually end up despawning, and then when new attempts would occur, would have a chance of spawning near this guy. And over time, this guy would have tons and tons of mobs around him, and this guy would end up having no mobs around him because he just keeps moving. And this was often occurring on multiplayer servers where people had elytra and they're flying through the world, they're constantly spawning in new mobs and despawning them. And the people that were just sitting in one spot would just keep accumulating more mobs around them until they were actually holding up the entire mob cap. Meaning that over here where this guy is, there would be absolutely no mobs, and no mobs would ever attempt, even if he stopped moving, no mobs would come into the world. And with this newest change that they add to 1.18, they made it so that each player would get the same amount of mobs around them. The game probably just keeps track of how many mobs are loaded by a single player and then make sure that he doesn't get overwhelmed by more mobs than he typically should have. So typically each player would have 70 hostile mobs. Anything over that would be coming from another player. So the game would probably just make sure that they both have equal amounts. Now this could affect people AFKing at farms. Sometimes you'll AFK at a mob farm, then you'll have a second player purposely AFKing somewhere else, but in an area where no other mobs will spawn. And then typically their mobs would end up coming near this guy and making his farm actually go faster. But with this new change, it might not actually help him out. The game might just say, hey, he has so many mobs, we're not going to give him any more. And just say, hey, well, this guy, he can't have any mobs, so we just won't put any in the game. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out going forward. Both this change as well as a change to mob spawning, I'm sure they're going to be tweaking it going forward until the full release of 1.18. And give me your feedback on this in the comments. And don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you enjoyed this in-depth look at the changes throughout the version. As always, I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye!